They thought money bought silence. They were wrong. At the most exclusive table in New York City, 5 men sat down to destroy a company. They called themselves kings. They called the man at the end of the table a nobody, a sacrificial lamb brought in for the slaughter. They spoke freely, mocking him, laughing at his silence. Then, the nobody whispered one sentence in flawless, classical Arabic. The room went dead silent. The mobsters were confused. But the waitress filling the water glasses? She didn't freeze. She answered him. That single exchange didn't just silence the table. It signed their death warrants. This is the story of how a waitress and a hidden billionaire brought down an empire. The humidity in the kitchen of Lourdes was enough to wilt a fresh orchid in 30 seconds, but Sarah Bennett didn't have the luxury of wilting. She had tuition to pay, a sick mother in a crowded apartment in Queens, and a manager named Claude who treated his staff like disposable napkins. "Table 4 is yours, Bennett," Claude snapped, shoving a tray of crystal flutes into her chest. "And for the love of God, do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look them in the eye. You are furniture. Expensive, silent furniture." Sarah adjusted the collar of her starch-stiff uniform. "Who's at table 4, Claude?" "The board," Claude whispered, the color draining from his face. "Vanguard Global. The merger is happening tonight. Marcus Sterling and his pack of wolves, and the guest." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew the type. Lourdes was a playground for the masters of the universe. Men who moved millions with a phone call and treated waitresses like ghosts. She pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and entered the dining room. The restaurant was dimly lit, smelling of truffle oil and old money. In the far corner, sequestered by a partition of frosted glass, sat table 4. There were 6 men. 5 of them were loud, taking up space, wearing bespoke Italian suits that cost more than Sarah's entire college education. At the head of the table sat Marcus Sterling. He was a real-life shark, CEO of Vanguard, a man whose face had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times this year. He had a laugh that sounded like a car engine backfiring. To his right were his lieutenants, Richard Vance, the CFO with eyes like a dead fish, Brody Clark, the aggressive lawyer who was already shouting at a busboy, and 2 silent enforcers, ostensibly consultants, named Victor and Kane. But it was the 6th man who caught Sarah's attention. He sat at the far end of the table, isolated. He wasn't wearing an Italian suit. He wore a simple, dark charcoal blazer, a black t-shirt underneath, and a watch that looked old, not flashy. He had messy dark hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in a few days. He was staring at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with a fork. He looked tired. He looked defeated. "Gentlemen," Marcus Sterling announced, raising a glass of scotch that cost $400 a shot. "To the end of an era, and the beginning of my total control." The men laughed. The man in the charcoal blazer didn't move. Sarah approached the table, moving with the practiced invisibility of a veteran server. She began placing water glasses down, her movements fluid. "More scotch," Brody snapped, not looking at her. "And bring the wine list, the real one, not the tourist list." "Of course, sir," Sarah said softly. She moved to the end of the table to fill the quiet man's glass. Up close, she saw his hands. They were rough, scarred. These weren't the hands of a banker. They looked like the hands of a man who worked on engines or fought in cages. "Water, sir?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were a piercing, startling grey. For a split second, he actually saw her. Not as furniture, but as a human being. "Please," he said. His voice was gravelly, low. "Thank you." "Don't waste your manners on the help, Silas," Marcus sneered from the head of the table. Save your breath for the apology you're going to sign later." The man named Silas didn't respond. He just watched the bubbles settle in his water glass. Sarah retreated to the shadows, her heart hammering. She didn't know who Silas was, but the tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. They weren't just eating dinner. They were cornering a wounded animal. "He's done," Richard Vance chuckled, loosening his tie. "Legal has the papers drawn up. We strip him of the founder's shares. We buy him out at pennies on the dollar, and we exile him. Vanguard becomes ours, Marcus. Legally, he still owns 51%, the lawyer, Brody, warned, until he signs those papers tonight." "He'll sign," Marcus said, cutting into his steak with violent precision. "Because if he doesn't, we release the information about his brother's gambling debts in Macau. We bury his family scandal. Silas Thorne might be a genius engineer, but he has a soft heart. He'll sign to save his family's name." Sarah stood by the service station, gripping her tray. This was Silas Thorne, the recluse billionaire, the man who invented the quantum link battery technology that half the world used. He looked like a man who slept in his car. She watched as the Capos of the corporate world tormented him. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu, caviar, wagyu, vintage 1982 Petrus, and put it all on his tab. They were humiliating him before they destroyed him. But as Sarah watched Silas Thorne, she noticed something the others didn't. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't sweating. He was tapping his finger against the table. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't a nervous tick. It was a rhythm. He wasn't a cornered animal. He was a hunter waiting for the wind to change. By the third course, the men at table 4 were drunk on power and red wine. The noise level was rising. Other patrons were glancing over, annoyed, but nobody dared complain about Marcus Sterling. Sarah returned to the table to clear the appetizers. She moved around Brody, who was leaning back in his chair, almost knocking her over. "Watch it," Brody spat. "Apologies, sir," Sarah murmured. "Silas!" Marcus shouted, waving a fork. "You haven't touched your food. What's the matter? Not good enough for the people's billionaire?" Silas Thorne finally spoke. "I'm not hungry, Marcus. I just want to see the papers." "All in good time," Marcus laughed. "First we celebrate. We celebrate the fact that you are too weak to run this company. You're a builder, Silas, a distinct mechanic. You aren't a killer. And in this world, you need to be a killer." Richard, the CFO, leaned in. "We've already lined up the buyers from the Middle East, the sovereign fund in Riyadh. They want the tech, Silas. They don't care about your ethical restrictions on military use. We're going to sell the battery tech to the highest bidder." Silas's hand stopped tapping. "We agreed the tech would never be used for autonomous weapons." "You agreed," Marcus corrected. "We agree with money, and the buyers are here in the city tonight. In fact, they're waiting for my call." Sarah was hovering near Silas's shoulder, refilling his water. She saw his jaw tighten. The mention of the Middle East deal seemed to trigger something in him. Silas looked down at the tablecloth. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the lawyers. He spoke into the air, his voice barely rising above a whisper. But he didn't speak English. "Idha ra'ayta niyub al-laythi barizatan, falatazunnanna anna al-laytha yabtasimu." The table went silent. Marcus blinked, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What? What did you just say?" Brody, the lawyer, frowned. "Is he having a stroke? What was that? Gibberish?" Richard laughed nervously. "He's speaking in tongues. The stress finally broke him. Look at him, he's lost his mind." "Speak English, Silas," Marcus barked, slamming his hand on the table. "Stop mumbling." Silas remained stone-faced. He didn't translate. He didn't explain. He just stared at the water glass. He was testing them. He was checking to see if anyone at the table, or anyone within earshot, understood the depth of the game he was playing. It was a famous line from classic poetry, a warning used by warriors and kings for centuries. The men at the table scoffed. They dismissed it as madness. They returned to their conversation, laughing at him. "He's finished," Marcus sneered. "Totally cracked." Sarah stood frozen for a second. The tray in her hand felt heavy. She knew that phrase. She hadn't just studied it. She had lived it. Before she was a waitress struggling in New York, Sarah Bennett had spent 4 years as a cryptologic linguist for the Navy, stationed in Bahrain. She had spent thousands of hours listening to intercepted comms, translating dialects from Levantine to modern standard Arabic. She knew exactly what Silas Thorne had said. If you see the lion's teeth, do not assume the lion is smiling. It was a threat, a warning that things were not what they seemed. Sarah looked at Silas. He was staring at the glass, his face a mask of sorrow, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the periphery. He felt alone. He thought he was the only one in the room who knew the war was about to start. It was a breach of protocol. A server should never speak. A server should be invisible. But Sarah saw a man being bullied by vultures who were about to sell dangerous technology to people who would use it to hurt innocents. She saw a man warning his enemies, and his enemies were too stupid to listen. She couldn't help herself. As she reached for the empty bread basket near his left hand, she leaned in. Her voice was soft, barely a breath, meant only for him. فَإِنَ اللَّيْثَ لَيْسَ لَهُ صَدِيقٌ وَلَكِنْ لَهُ فَرِيسَةٌ. Silas Thorne froze. His hand stopped tapping. His head snapped up, turning to look directly at her. For the first time all night, the dull, tired look vanished from his eyes, replaced by a shock of electric intensity. The table went quiet again. Not because they understood, but because the atmosphere had shifted instantly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus looked from Silas to Sarah. What? What did she say? Did the waitress just speak that gibberish too? Silas ignored Marcus completely. He was locked onto Sarah's eyes. He looked at her not as a servant, but as a soldier recognizing another soldier in the trenches. She had completed the poem. She had improvised a response that matched the meter and the meaning of his warning. For the lion has no friends, only prey. "Who are you?" Silas asked, his voice steady and commanding, the gravel gone. Sarah straightened her back, clutching the bread basket. "Just the waitress, sir. Would you like more water?" Silas slowly smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who just found the weapon he was looking for. "Marcus," Silas said, not looking away from Sarah. "You were right about one thing. I'm not a killer." He stood up. "But I think I just found someone who can help me bury the bodies." Marcus stood up, his face red. "Sit down, Silas. You don't get to stand up until you sign the papers, and you—" He pointed a thick, sausage-like finger at Sarah. "You're fired. Get out of my face." "No," Silas said. The word cracked through the room like a whip. "She stays. In fact, pull up a chair for her, Marcus." "Excuse me?" Marcus sputtered. "You heard me," Silas said, unbuttoning his cheap blazer to reveal a very expensive, very tactical-looking satellite phone clipped to his belt. "Miss Bennett, I assume that's your name from your tag. Please, sit down. We have a negotiation to finish, and I need a translator." "Because the buyers you mentioned? The ones in Riyadh?" Silas looked at Richard, the CFO. "They aren't buying the company from you, Richard. They're waiting for my signal to bankrupt you." Silas turned to Sarah. "Sit down, Sarah. It's time we taught these boys a lesson in linguistics." The silence in Lure's door was no longer the polite hush of fine dining. It was the suffocating quiet of a bomb site just before the secondary explosion. Sarah Bennett didn't move immediately. Her training kicked in, the rigid discipline instilled during those long nights in the secure facilities in Bahrain. Assess, adapt, act. The manager, Claude, was staring at her from the service station, with eyes wide enough to show the whites all around. He was making a slashing motion across his throat, signaling her to leave, to run, to apologize. But Silas Thorne was looking at her, and in his eyes, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw an extraction target, a man alone in hostile territory. "Sit," Silas repeated, gesturing to the empty chair between himself and Richard Vance. Sarah placed the bread basket down on the white tablecloth with a deliberate, soft thud. She wiped her hands on her apron, untied it, and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore black slacks and a crisp white shirt. Standard uniform, but without the apron, she looked less like a servant and more like a neutral party. She pulled out the chair and sat. "This is insane," Brody Clark spat, throwing his napkin down. "Marcus, are we really going to let the help sit at the negotiating table? This is $1 billion merger, not a soup kitchen." "She's not the help anymore," Silas said, calmly, pouring water into a fresh glass for Sarah. "She's my consultant, and seeing as she speaks the language of our partners better than anyone else at this table, I'd say she's the most valuable person here." Marcus Sterling's face had turned a dangerous shade of plum. He leaned forward, the veins in his thick neck pulsing against his collar. "You're stalling, Silas. This is a pathetic theater trick. You think bringing a waitress into this is going to rattle me? I have the board. I have the votes. I have your brother's debts. You sign the transfer of the IP rights, or I ruin your entire bloodline by morning." Silas took a sip of water. "Sarah," he said, ignoring Marcus, "do you know what these men do?" Sarah looked at the men around the table. She looked at Richard Vance, whose hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his wine. She looked at the two consultants, Victor and Kane, who hadn't touched their food. They were watching her with dead, shark-like eyes. She knew that look. Private military contractors, mercenaries in suits. "They look like corporate raiders," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But the two on the end are security. Probably ex-special forces, judging by the cauliflower ear on the left one and the way the right one is checking the exits every 30 seconds. Kane, the man on the right, narrowed his eyes. His hand drifted toward his jacket pocket. "Observant," Silas murmured. "Very good. You're hired. Your rate is $5,000 an hour. Does that cover your shift tonight?" Sarah didn't blink. "It covers the inconvenience." "Good." Silas turned to Marcus. "Now let's talk about the Riyadh deal. You told me the Sovereign Fund agreed to buy the battery tech for civilian energy grids. You said they signed the ethical usage clause." "They did." Marcus lied smoothly, though a bead of sweat tricked down his temple. "It's all in the contract. Standard boilerplate." "And yet," Silas said, tapping the table again in that rhythmic beat, "my sources tell me there's a secondary addendum, a shadow rider attached to the contract, one that authorizes the tech to be stripped for guidance systems in long-range drones. Is that true, Marcus?" "Paranoia," Richard Vance interjected, his voice too high. "Pure paranoia. Silas, you've been locked in your lab too long. You're seeing ghosts." "Am I?" Silas reached into his jacket pocket. Instantly, Victor and Kane tensed. Victor half rose from his chair. Silas pulled out a pack of gum. He offered a piece to Sarah. She took it. "I don't like ghosts," Silas said, chewing slowly. "I like facts. And the fact is, Marcus, you're trying to sell my life's work to a faction that isn't even the official government. You're selling it to a splinter group, arms dealers masquerading as bureaucrats. Prove it, Brody sneered. You have no access to the company servers anymore. We locked you out at 9 a.m. this morning. That's true, Silas admitted. You did lock me out. But you forgot one thing. I built the system. You just rent it. Silas turned to Sarah. Sarah, I'm going to make a call. The man on the other end is named Omar Al-Fayed. He claims to be the liaison for the buyer. He speaks English, but when he gets nervous, or when he's lying, he switches to a specific dialect of Gulf Arabic mixed with French technical terms. He thinks I don't understand it. He thinks I'm just a stupid American engineer. Silas placed the satellite phone on the table. I need you to listen, not to what he says to me. I need you to translate what he says to the people in the room with him. Marcus laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You think Al-Fayed is going to just chat on an open line? He's a professional. He's a greedy man waiting for a wire transfer of $200 million, Silas corrected. Greedy men make mistakes. Silas dialed. He hit the speaker button. The ring-back tone echoed through the silent restaurant. Brewing. Brewing. Sarah felt a cold knot in her stomach. She knew exactly what was happening. Silas was using her as a human lie detector. If she got this wrong, if she mistranslated, these men wouldn't just fire her. The two men at the end of the table, Victor and Kane, would ensure she never made it back to Queens. But looking at Marcus's smug, oily face, and thinking about her manager Claude, who treated her like dirt, a fire lit up inside her. She was tired of being powerless. She was tired of serving water to monsters. The line clicked open. Mr. Thorne, a smooth, cultured voice came through the speaker. We have been waiting. The window for the transfer is closing. Good evening, Omar, Silas said, leaning back. I'm sitting here with Marcus Sterling. He says we're ready to sign. I just wanted to confirm one final detail regarding the civilian application of the batteries. There was a pause, then a laugh. But of course, Mr. Thorne, as we discussed, green energy for the future cities. It is a noble endeavor. Silas looked at Sarah. Sarah watched the phone. She leaned in, focusing her hearing, shutting out the clinking of silverware from the other tables. She could hear background noise on the other end of the line. A distinct hum. Voices. Ask him about the encryption keys, Sarah whispered to Silas. Silas raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. Omar, before I release the signature, I need to know you have the encryption keys for the safety locks, just to ensure no one tampers with the hardware. We have them, Omar replied quickly. My technical team is ready. Then Sarah heard it. It was faint, muffled, as if Omar had covered the receiver with his hand, but not completely. He was speaking to someone in the room with him. Al-Gabi Sadak al-Kidba, Jahiz al-Tahwil ila Hisab al-Qayman, al-Safka Tammat. Sarah's eyes widened. She looked at Silas. What did he say? Silas asked. The table held its breath. Marcus looked confident. Brody looked bored. Sarah looked directly at Marcus Sterling. He said, The idiot believed the lie. Prepare the transfer to the Cayman account. The deal is done. Marcus's face went white. He's lying, Marcus shouted. She's lying. She's just a waitress. She doesn't know what she's hearing. There's more, Sarah said, her voice cutting through Marcus's panic. He used the word Cayman Islands, and he didn't say the Sovereign Fund. He said the Syndicate. Silas's expression darkened. The playful demeanor vanished. Thank you, Sarah, Silas said. He spoke into the phone. Omar? One more thing. Yes, Mr. Thorne? I brought a translator tonight, And she says you have a very big mouth." Silas ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its arc. Marcus Sterling stood up slowly. The pretense of the dinner was over. The merger was dead. Now, it was just a crime scene waiting to happen. "You think you're clever, Silas?" Marcus hissed. "You think because you caught us in a lie, you win? You don't leave this table until that IP is transferred. We don't need the buyers anymore. We'll take it by force." He snapped his fingers. At the end of the table, Victor and Kane stood up. They didn't look like diners anymore. They looked like executioners. "Clear the restaurant," Marcus ordered Brody. "Now." Brody Clark scrambled up, knocking his chair over. He rushed toward the front of the restaurant, flashing a badge that Sarah recognized immediately. It wasn't a police badge, but a high-level private security credential that usually made civilians scatter. "Private event!" Brody shouted at the few remaining couples in the dining room. "Kitchen fire, everyone out, now! The meal is comped, just go!" Confusion rippled through the room. A few patrons protested, but the urgency in Brody's voice, combined with the intimidating bulk of Victor and Kane moving to block the main exit, sent people grabbing their coats. Claude, the manager, tried to approach the table. "Monsieur Sterling, what is the meaning of—" "Get out, Claude," Marcus growled, not looking at him. "Take your staff and leave. If I see anyone in this room in 2 minutes, I burn this restaurant to the ground with lawsuits." Claude looked at Sarah. He hesitated, a flicker of conscience warring with his cowardice. Cowardice won. He turned and fled toward the kitchen, herding the busboys and chefs out the back door. In less than 3 minutes, Lour's door was empty. The front door was locked. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn. It was just the 6 men. And Sarah. "Well," Silas said, remaining seated, looking remarkably calm for a man who had just been surrounded. "The service here has really gone downhill." "Shut up!" Marcus snapped. He walked around the table, standing behind Silas. "Victor, get the laptop. Kane, watch the girl. If she screams, break her jaw." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. She shifted her weight in the chair, planting her feet flat on the floor. Kane was moving toward her. He was big, at least 6'4", moving with a heavy, confident gait. He didn't see her as a threat. He saw a waitress. That was his first mistake. "Silas," Marcus said, placing a hand on Silas's shoulder, squeezing hard. "Here is how this goes. You are going to access the cloud mainframe. You are going to transfer the admin rights to me. Then, you are going to transfer the encryption keys." "And if I don't?" Silas asked. "Then Kane hurts the girl," Marcus said simply. "I know you, Silas. You're a moralist. You think you're a hero. You won't let an innocent civilian get hurt for your pride." Silas looked at Sarah. His eyes were apologetic. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this, Sarah." Sarah looked up at Kane, who was now standing right beside her chair. He smelled of stale tobacco and gun oil. "Don't worry about me, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said. Her voice was deceptively fragile. "Open the laptop," Marcus commanded. Victor slammed a sleek silver laptop onto the table in front of Silas. "Do it." Silas opened the laptop. The screen glowed blue, illuminating his face. He typed in a command. "It's biometric," he said. "I need my fingerprint." "Scan it," Marcus ordered. Silas placed his finger on the scanner. A green bar loaded. "Access granted," the computer-synthesized voice announced. "Good," Marcus breathed, leaning in, his greed overpowering his caution. "Now the transfer." "There is a problem," Silas said. "What problem?" "The system," Silas said, turning the laptop so Marcus could see. "It's not connecting to the Cayman accounts. It's connecting to the FBI cyber division." Marcus froze. He squinted at the screen. On the screen, A file was uploading. It wasn't a transfer of funds. It was a massive data dump labeled Project Vulture, Evidence of Embezzlement and Illegal Arms Trade. "What did you do?" Marcus whispered, horror dawning on him. "I told you," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming hard as iron. "I'm not a killer, I'm an engineer, and I just engineered your confession. Every word spoken at this table for the last hour has been recorded. The microphone isn't in the laptop. It's in my watch." Marcus roared. "Kill him! Victor, kill him now!" Victor lunged across the table, pulling a suppressed pistol from a shoulder holster. At the same moment, Kane reached for Sarah, his massive hand aiming for her throat. Time seemed to slow down for Sarah. She didn't think. She reacted. The muscle memory of close-quarters combat, CQC, training she had undergone in the Navy, training she had kept hidden, training she kept sharp in cheap gyms in Queens, fired through her nervous system. As Kane's hand came down, Sarah didn't pull away. She drove her body upward. She grabbed Kane's wrist with her left hand, twisting his momentum, and drove a fork, the heavy, silver dinner fork she had palmed from the table moments ago, hard into the soft flesh of his upper thigh. Kane howled, his leg buckling. Sarah didn't stop. She spun, using his collapse as a pivot point, and drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus. The air left his lungs with a sickening whoosh. He doubled over. Sarah grabbed the back of his head and slammed his face into the edge of the mahogany table. Crack. Kane hit the floor, unconscious, his nose shattered. It had taken 4 seconds. Sarah stood up, breathing hard, the silver fork still clutched in her hand like a dagger. Across the table, chaos had erupted. Victor had pulled his gun, but Silas hadn't just sat there. When Victor lunged, Silas had kicked the heavy oak table upward. The table flipped, crashing into Victor's knees, sending his shot wild into the ceiling. Thwip! The suppressed gunshot tore through the plaster. Victor stumbled back, trying to regain his balance, leveling the gun again at Silas. "Drop it!" Sarah yelled. She had scooped up Kane's gun from the floor where it had fallen. She held it with a two-handed grip, her stance perfect, her aim locked on Victor's chest. Victor froze. He looked at his partner on the floor, bleeding out on the expensive carpet. He looked at the billionaire who had just flipped a 300-pound table, and he looked at the waitress who was holding a Glock 19 like she was born with it. "You're not a waitress," Victor growled, his eyes narrowing. "And you're not getting paid enough for this," Sarah replied. "Put the gun down. The police are already on their way." Silas uploaded the file. "The sirens you hear in your head? They're going to be real in about 2 minutes. Marcus Sterling was cowering in the corner, near the wine rack. Richard and Brody were under the overturned table, whimpering. "Victor!" Marcus screamed. "Shoot her! Shoot them both! I'll pay you double, 10 million!" Victor hesitated. He looked at Sarah's eyes. They were cold. They were the eyes of someone who would pull the trigger and not lose a wink of sleep. Slowly, Victor raised his hands. He crouched and placed his pistol on the floor. "Smart choice," Silas said, dusting off his charcoal blazer. He walked over and kicked the gun away from Victor. Silas turned to Sarah. He looked at the unconscious man on the floor, then at the gun in her hand. He let out a long, shaky breath. "Remind me," Silas said, a small smile playing on his lips, "to never complain about the service in this restaurant." Sarah didn't smile. She didn't lower the gun. She kept it trained on Victor. "We aren't done yet," she said. "Victor gave up too easy." "What?" Silas frowned. "He's a pro," Sarah said, her eyes locked on the mercenary. "Pros don't drop their weapons unless they have a backup plan." As if on cue, the kitchen doors burst open. 3 more men, dressed in kitchen staff uniforms but wearing tactical vests, stormed in. They weren't waiters. They were the backup team Marcus had hidden in the back, and they were holding heavy assault rifles. "Drop the gun, girl!" the lead man shouted, aiming an AR-15 at her head. Sarah realized with a sinking heart that she had been right. Marcus Sterling hadn't just come to negotiate. He had come to wage a war. She looked at Silas. He was exposed. She was exposed. They were outgunned. "Well," Silas said, his voice tight. "That's unfortunate." Marcus stood up, adjusting his suit, his arrogance returning in a rush. He walked over to Victor and slapped him on the back. "Did you really think I'd come here with just 2 men?" Marcus laughed. He looked at Sarah. "Nice moves, honey. Really. Impressive. But you brought a handgun to a rifle fight." Marcus walked over to Silas, grabbing him by the hair. "Now!" Marcus hissed. "You're going to stop that upload, and then we're going to have a little fun with your bodyguard here." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. She had 1 shot. Maybe 2. She could take out the lead rifleman, but the others would cut her and Silas to ribbons. She needed a distraction. She needed a miracle. Or, she realized, glancing at the fire alarm pull station on the wall 5 feet away. She needed chaos. The barrel of the AR-15 was a black eye staring unblinkingly at Sarah's forehead. The man holding it, a mercenary with a scar running through his eyebrow, had his finger taut on the trigger. "Drop it," he repeated, "or I paint the wall with you." Sarah's mind raced. She calculated the angles. 3 rifles, 1 pistol in her hand, Silas behind her, unarmed. Distance to the mercenary, 12 feet. Probability of survival in a direct firefight, 0. She needed an equalizer. Her eyes flickered past the gunman to the wall behind him. There, mounted near the ceiling, was the Ansel fire suppression canister, a massive red tank piped directly over the open-flame grill station in the exhibition kitchen. It wasn't water. It was a high-pressure chemical wet agent designed to smother grease fires instantly. "I said drop it," the mercenary shouted, stepping forward. "Okay," Sarah said, raising her hand slowly, the pistol dangling from her trigger finger. "Okay. You win." She exhaled. She let her body sag, feigning surrender. The gunman relaxed just a fraction of an inch. His eyes shifted from her gun to her face, a fatal loss of focus. In that split second, Sarah didn't drop the gun. She snapped her wrist up and fired. Bang! She didn't aim for the man. She aimed for the nozzle of the Ansel tank behind him. The bullet sheared the valve. With a sound like a jet engine taking off, the tank exploded. A massive, pressurized cloud of white chemical foam and potassium acetate blasted into the room. It hit the hot grill, instantly vaporizing into a thick, choking fog that expanded with violent speed. "Move!" Sarah screamed, grabbing Silas by the collar of his jacket. The dining room vanished in a whiteout. The mercenaries were shouting, coughing, firing blindly into the mist. Crack, crack, crack. Bullets tore through the mahogany tables and shattered the wine glasses, but they were shooting at ghosts. The chemical agent stung the eyes and burned the throat. "Stay low," Sarah hissed, dragging Silas onto the floor. They crawled on hands and knees, navigating by memory. The floor was slick with the chemical slime. "Where are we going?" Silas coughed, his eyes streaming tears. "The kitchen," Sarah commanded. "It's a fatal funnel. If they follow us, they have to come through the double doors. We can hold them there." They scrambled through the swinging doors into the stainless steel labyrinth of the main kitchen. It was empty. Claude and the staff had fled, but the gas burners were still hissing, and pans were bubbling with abandoned sauces. Sarah kicked the doors shut and looked around frantically. She needed to barricade the door. "Grab that prep table!" she yelled. Silas didn't argue. He grabbed the end of a heavy steel prep table loaded with dirty dishes. Together they shoved it in front of the swinging doors. Thud. A body slammed against the doors from the other side. Then a boot. The mercenaries were trying to kick it in. "Clear the back exit," Sarah ordered, checking the magazine of her pistol. She had 4 rounds left. Silas ran to the rear delivery door, tugging at the handle. It didn't budge. He shoved his shoulder against it. Nothing. "It's locked," Silas shouted. "From the outside. Marcus must have had his men secure the perimeter before they came in." They were trapped. The dining room was full of killers. The back exit was sealed, and the prep table blocking the kitchen doors was inching forward with every kick from the other side. Sarah looked at Silas. The billionaire looked terrified, his expensive shirt ruined, his face smeared with soot and white chemical powder. But he wasn't cowering. He was looking for a solution. "The walk-in," Silas said, pointing to the massive steel door of the freezer. "Is it bulletproof?" "It's 4 inches of insulated steel," Sarah said. "It'll stop rifle rounds, but if we go in there we freeze, and there's no way out." "I don't need a way out," Silas said, his eyes hard. "I need 10 minutes. My laptop is still in the dining room, but I have my phone. If I can bridge the connection to the building's local server, I can override the electronic locks on the back door." "You can hack the door?" "I built the security protocol for the company that made the door," Silas said. "But the signal is jammed. Marcus has a localized jammer. I need a hard line, an Ethernet port." Sarah looked around the kitchen. It was all stainless steel and tile. No computers. "The manager's office," she realized. "Claude's office. It's inside the dry storage pantry. There's a computer in there." Crash! The prep table slid back 2 feet. The barrel of a rifle poked through the gap in the double doors. "Go!" Sarah shoved Silas toward the pantry. "Get to the office. Hack the door. I'll buy you time." "Sarah! Go!" Silas ran into the dry storage room. Sarah didn't follow. She took cover behind the solid steel range, gripping her pistol. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stovetop with her left hand. The kitchen doors burst open. The prep table toppled over with a deafening crash of breaking china. 2 mercenaries spilled into the kitchen, coughing, their eyes red from the chemicals. They swept their rifles left and right. "Clear right!" one shouted. "Clear left!" They advanced slowly, boots crunching on broken plates. Sarah waited. She controlled her breathing. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. When the first mercenary passed the edge of the stove, Sarah moved. She didn't shoot. She couldn't waste the ammo. She swung the cast-iron skillet with every ounce of strength she possessed. Clang! The heavy iron connected with the mercenary's helmet. The sound was like a church bell. The man dropped instantly, his rifle skittering across the tiles. The second mercenary spun around, raising his weapon. Sarah dropped to the floor, firing 2 shots from the hip. Bang! Bang! One hit his vest, the other hit his thigh. He roared and fell back, spraying bullets into the ceiling lights. Sparks showered down, plunging the kitchen into semi-darkness. "Silas!" Sarah screamed over the ringing in her ears. "How much longer?" "Almost there." Silas's voice came from the pantry. "I'm bypassing the firewall. Almost." The wounded mercenary on the floor was trying to crawl toward his rifle. Sarah kicked it away, sending it sliding under the ovens. She leveled her gun at his head. "Stay down," she warned. Suddenly, the kitchen intercom crackled to life. It was Marcus Sterling's voice, echoing from the dining room speakers. "You're delaying the inevitable, Silas," Marcus taunted. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "You think the police are coming? I made a donation to the NYPD Benevolent Association last week, a very large one. The dispatch has us flagged as a malfunctioning alarm. No one is coming for at least 20 minutes. By then you'll be ashes." Sarah's heart sank. 20 minutes. They had maybe 2. "Sarah!" Silas shouted. "I got it! The back door is unlocking in 3, 2! Click. The heavy magnetic lock on the rear delivery door disengaged with a loud thunk. "Let's go!" Sarah yelled, scrambling up. She ran to the pantry, grabbing Silas by the arm. They sprinted for the back door. Sarah shoved it open, and they burst out into the cool night air of the alleyway. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. "The car!" Silas gasped, pointing down the alley. "My car. It's parked on the next block. A grey sedan." "Run," Sarah said. They took off down the alleyway, their footsteps echoing off the brick walls. Behind them, the kitchen door banged open. Voices shouted, "They're in the alley! Flank them! Cut them off at 5th Avenue!" The hunt wasn't over. It had just moved to the streets. The New York night was indifferent to their desperation. Taxis honked, steam rose from manholes, and tourists laughed on the corners, completely unaware that 2 blocks away, a billionaire and a waitress were running for their lives. Silas was fit, but he wasn't conditioned for urban evasion. He was lagging. Sarah grabbed his hand, pulling him through a gap between 2 construction dumpsters. "Stop," she whispered, pulling him into the shadows of a scaffolding tunnel. "Why?" Silas wheezed, hands on his knees. "We have to. Get to the car." "No," Sarah said, scanning the street. "Look." At the end of the block, a black SUV was idling. A man in a suit stood outside it, talking into an earpiece. "They anticipated the exit," Sarah said grimly. "They have a perimeter team. If we go for your car, we're dead." Silas slid down against the brick wall, wiping sweat and soot from his face. "So we're boxed in." Marcus wasn't kidding. He brought an army. "He brought a clean-up crew," Sarah corrected. "This isn't a merger, Silas. This is a hit." She looked at him. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by the dull ache of bruises and the sharp clarity of their situation. "Who is the buyer, really?" Sarah asked. "You said the syndicate back at the restaurant. That's not a sovereign fund." Silas looked up, his grey eyes reflecting the neon lights of a nearby bodega. "You know Vanguard, the massive investment firm?" "Everyone knows them." "Marcus runs a shadow subsidiary," Silas explained, his voice low. "They don't just invest in tech, they invest in instability. They buy weapons tech and sell it to destabilize regions so they can short the currency. The batteries. My batteries." He took a shaky breath. "I built them to store solar energy for hospitals in developing nations. Efficient, endless power. But Marcus realized that if you bypass the safety regulators, the energy density is high enough to power a railgun on a drone swarm. He's selling the tech to a PMC group called Garrison Tactical. They operate in the grey zones, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine. They want to weaponize my life's work." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Garrison Tactical. She knew the name. In the Navy, they were spoken of in hushed tones, mercenaries who were paid to do the jobs the military couldn't legally touch. "If Marcus gets those encryption keys," Silas said, "Garrison can retrofit thousands of drones in a week. They'll be unstoppable." "Then we have to make sure he doesn't get them," Sarah said. "How? We're trapped." Sarah looked up at the building they were leaning against. It wasn't just any building. It was the Helix Tower, a half-finished luxury skyscraper, a skeleton of steel and glass wrapped in scaffolding and safety netting. "We go up," Sarah said. "Up?" Silas looked at the looming construction site. "That's a dead end." "No," Sarah said. "It's high ground, and it's a construction site. That means 2 things. Radios have spotty reception in the steel grid, and there are tools we can use. Plus, if we get to the crane at the top, we might be able to signal the police chopper. Marcus can pay off the dispatch, but he can't hide a distress flare from a police helicopter." "I don't have a flare," Silas said. "We'll make one," Sarah said. "Come on." They slipped through a tear in the chain-link fence and entered the construction site. The lobby was a cavern of raw concrete and exposed rebar. They found the construction elevator, the external hoist used for materials. "Can you operate this?" Sarah asked. "It's a simple hydraulic lift," Silas said, examining the controls. "Yes." They stepped into the cage. Silas hit the lever, and the hoist jerked upward. They began to ascend, the city dropping away below them. 10th floor. 20th floor. As they rose, the wind picked up, whipping through the open cage. Suddenly, a bullet sparked off the metal railing near Sarah's hand. Ping! She ducked. They saw us. Below, in the alley, 3 figures were looking up, firing suppressed weapons. The bullets whizzed past them like angry hornets. "Faster!" Sarah yelled. "It's maxed out!" Silas shouted. The lift shuddered as a bullet hit the hydraulic line. Fluid sprayed out. The cage lurched, slowing down. "We have to jump," Sarah said. They were at the 30th floor. The lift was grinding to a halt, hanging precariously off the side of the building. The open floor of the skyscraper was 5 feet away, a gap of empty air over a 300-foot drop. "I can't," Silas said, looking down. His face was pale. "You have to," Sarah said. She grabbed his shoulder. "Silas, look at me. Not down. Look at me. On 3. The lift groaned, tilting dangerously. 1, Sarah counted. 2, 3. They leaped. For a terrifying second, they were weightless, suspended over the abyss of the New York skyline. They hit the concrete floor of the 30th story hard. Sarah rolled, absorbing the impact, but Silas landed awkwardly, twisting his ankle. He cried out in pain. Sarah scrambled to him, dragging him behind a pallet of drywall. "My leg!" Silas gritted his teeth. "I can't walk on it." Sarah checked it. It wasn't broken, but it was a severe sprain. He wasn't running anywhere. She looked around. They were on an open floor, just concrete pillars and wind. No walls, no hiding spots. And the construction elevator was stuck just below them. The bad guys wouldn't take the broken elevator. They would take the stairs, which meant they had about 5 minutes before the kill team reached the 30th floor. Sarah checked her gun. Empty. She had fired her last rounds in the kitchen. She tossed the useless Glock aside. She was unarmed, her protectee was crippled, and a hit squad was coming up the stairs. Sarah looked at Silas. He was in pain, but he was pulling something out of his pocket, his tactical watch. "Sarah," he said, his voice straining, "this building, it's a smart building prototype. Vanguard is one of the investors. I have the schematics." "So?" "So," Silas tapped the watch face furiously. "I can't stop them from coming up, but I can control the environment, the lights, the high-voltage lines for the heavy machinery, the crane." He looked at her, a desperate plan forming in his eyes. "You need to be my hands," Silas said. "I'll be the eyes. I can access the site's cameras and sensors. I can tell you where they are. I can turn the lights off. I can overload the power boxes." "I don't have a weapon," Sarah said. Silas pointed to a pile of tools near the drywall. A nail gun, a heavy wrench, a coil of industrial wire. "Improvise," Silas said. "You're the soldier. I'm just tech support." Sarah looked at the tools. She looked at the dark stairwell door where the killers would emerge. She picked up the pneumatic nail gun. It was heavy, connected to a portable air compressor tank. "Okay," she said, feeling the weight of the tool. "Let's play." "They're on the 28th floor," Silas whispered, staring at his watch. 3 of them. Victor is leading. They're moving fast. Sarah dragged the air compressor behind a pillar, hiding the hose. She positioned herself in the shadows. "Kill the lights," she whispered. Silas tapped his watch. Zzzt, the floodlights on the 30th floor died. the entire floor plunged into pitch blackness, illuminated only by the distant city glow. The door to the stairwell creaked open. "Stay sharp," Victor's voice echoed in the darkness. "They're hurt. Use thermal if you have it." Sarah held her breath, the nail gun raised. The hunt was on. The darkness of the 30th floor wasn't empty. It was alive with the hum of the city and the heavy breathing of the hunters. "Target 11 o'clock. 10 feet, Silas whispered, staring at the faint blue schematic on his watch. Sarah moved barefoot across the concrete, the pneumatic nail gun heavy in her hands. She waited until the shadow of Victor passed a concrete pillar. "Now," Silas hissed. Sarah stepped out and pulled the trigger. Thwack, thwack. 2 3-inch framing nails slammed into Victor's tactical vest, knocking the wind out of him, while a third pinned his sleeve to the drywall behind him. He roared, spinning around, but Sarah was already moving. Silas tapped his watch again, and a suspended pallet of bricks, held by the crane above, dropped 3 feet with a terrifying crash between Victor and his backup. Dust billowed. Confusion reigned. "It's over, Victor!" Sarah yelled, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You're dead!" Victor screamed, struggling to rip his arm free. Suddenly, the floor was bathed in blinding white light. The roar of rotors drowned out the wind. Rising from the edge of the building, like a mechanical dragon, was an NYPD helicopter, its searchlight pinning the mercenaries against the grey concrete. "Drop the weapons!" A voice boomed from the chopper's PA system. "This is the NYPD." Silas had been right. The upload hadn't just gone to the FBI. It had triggered a Level 1 priority alert for a kidnapping in progress. Victor slumped, dropping his rifle. The fight was over. 3 months later. The office on the 80th floor of the newly finished Helix Tower overlooked the entire city. Sarah Bennett stood by the window, looking at the view. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a tailored navy suit. "The board voted unanimously," Silas Thorne said, walking in with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Marcus is looking at 20 years for corporate espionage and conspiracy. The company is ours again." "Yours," Sarah corrected, taking the glass. "Ours," Silas insisted. "I can build the tech, Sarah. I can save the world with batteries. But I can't protect it. I need someone who can see the lions before they smile." He placed a contract on the desk. Head of Global Security and Chief Strategy Officer. "You saved my life for minimum wage plus tips," Silas smiled. "Let's see what you can do with a real budget." Sarah looked at the contract, then at the city below. She took a sip of water. "Deal," she said. "But we're changing the coffee in the break room." And that is how a spilled glass of water and a few words of Arabic toppled a corrupt empire. It proves that in a world of loud talkers and flashy suits, the most dangerous person in the room is often the one nobody notices. Sarah didn't just serve the table, she turned it. If you enjoyed this story of justice, suspense, and the waitress who fought back, please smash that like button. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.